A sharp crack sliced through Terminal B. People stopped mid-stride. Suitcases froze mid-roll. A woman near Gate 17 gasped audibly and covered her mouth. At the center of it all, a 14-year-old boy stood still, cheek blazing red, lips clamped shut. He wasn't crying. He just looked straight ahead. His name was Ari Castillo. The flight crew member who had slapped him, Agent L. Graves, stood with her hands still half raised, her face flushed with frustration and disbelief. All Ari did was reach into his hoodie pocket, pull out a small, unbranded black phone, and tap the screen twice. No words, no gestures. Then, calmly, he looked her straight in the eye and said, "You just triggered something you can't undo. Have you ever seen a system fall apart because someone underestimated a quiet kid? Tell us where you're watching from today." 4 minutes earlier, Ari had been standing in line like everyone else. Terminal B was buzzing with life. Businessmen scrolling through email, families wrangling toddlers, security dogs weaving through suitcases. It looked like any other day at Houston International. Until the agent at the checkpoint scowled at his ticket. "This isn't valid," she snapped. Ari glanced up. "Yes, it is. You can scan it." "You think this is funny?" she barked. "Where did you even get this?" "I told you, my dad owns this airport." That was the moment. The moment her face twisted into a mix of disgust and mockery. The moment she thought he was just another kid making stuff up, throwing around fake privilege like some social media dare. "You're kidding me, right? Your dad owns the airport?" Ari didn't blink. "Yes." "You little liar," she hissed. And before anyone could say anything, before the security guy nearby could step in, she slapped him across the face, right in front of dozens of witnesses. Back in the present, the ripple effect had already begun. Passengers who'd seen it started whispering. Phones came out, some filming, some dialing. The tension crackled like static in the air. But Ari? He didn't move, didn't fumble, didn't fight back. He tapped the phone a third time, and the lights above the terminal subtly flickered. Just once. A few miles away, in a secure data facility tucked inside an office complex labeled Castillo AeroVentures R&D, a terminal beeped to life. EAM Protocol Delta. Activated user A. Castillo. Location: Houston International. Terminal B event. Physical assault. Minor passenger. Owner authority detected. Meanwhile, Ari was quietly being led into a gray holding room near the TSA admin zone. No handcuffs, no real explanation, just the illusion of control. The moment he stepped inside, Ari looked around like he already knew the layout. One vent, one camera, one faulty security panel in the corner. He sat down, folded his hands, and waited. Let's rewind a bit further. Ari Castillo was no stranger to airports. He grew up walking the runways in private shoes. His father, Dr. Marco Castillo, didn't just own an airport. He built the digital infrastructure behind 10 of the busiest terminals in North America and held controlling shares in 4 of them, including Houston International. But that wasn't the point. The point was, this was a test. "Do I have to wear the hoodie?" Ari had asked that morning. "Yes," Marco replied. "You go in like everyone else. Quiet, alone. Let them judge. And when they do, you press once, then wait 7 minutes." In the holding room, a red dot blinked softly on the ceiling camera. Ari looked directly into the lens and said, "This isn't about me. It's about what happens when no one's watching. Except I am." 3 minutes left. Across the airport, status screens began to blink. "Gate access pending. Standby. Flight delayed. Internal system hold. Internal review. Please see gate staff." Staff scrambled to reboot terminals. Nothing worked. The system was no longer in their hands. 2 minutes left. At the FAA Monitoring Center in Washington, a panel lit up with one word that made a senior advisor's jaw clench. Castillo. One of the few names in the aviation world that didn't need further explanation. At Houston International's control tower, the operations director called security. "We're locked out of Terminal B, can't even override door access." "Try again," the voice on the other end said. "I did." "Who triggered it?" Pause. "Kid named Ari Castillo." Dead silence. "Oh God." 1 minute left. The woman who slapped Ari? She was now being pulled aside by her supervisor, who had just gotten a direct call from Castillo HQ. "You're being asked to step down immediately," he said. "They've initiated a behavioral ethics lockdown." What the hell does that mean? It means this entire terminal is about to freeze. Back in the gray room, Ari stood. He walked up to the vent, leaned slightly toward it, and spoke again. "This isn't revenge. It's reflection. That slap was never about me. It was about what you thought I wasn't allowed to be." He returned to the chair, calm, composed, Zorohosuo remaining. The fire alarm didn't go off. The sprinklers didn't rain down. There were no flashing red lights, just a soft tone from the overhead speakers throughout Terminal B. "Attention! Terminal B is temporarily under internal security review. Please remain in place. Do not attempt to override system locks. A compliance team will arrive shortly." Ari looked up and let out a breath. The message wasn't just for the public. It was a signal. The world had just been reminded. Some kids don't yell back. They let the system scream for them. Some calls ring loud. Others, the most dangerous ones, don't make a sound at all. The black phone Ari tapped wasn't just any device. It was a custom-encoded node synced to a protocol system known only to a handful of people in the aviation world. EAM Sentinel. That single touch had already triggered a 7-minute chain of silent escalations, monitored in real time by operatives across 4 cities. And deep in the heart of Castillo Aero Ventures HQ, a call was now connecting. Inside a glass-walled conference room high above downtown Houston, Dr. Marco Castillo stood before a digital wall screen, mid-presentation. Behind him were projections of biometric scan interfaces, AI learning curves, and ethics scoring dashboards. A VP knocked once, then stepped in, pale-faced. "Sir, it's Protocol Delta." Marco froze. The room went quiet. "Terminal B," the VP added. "Houston International, initiated by your son." The breath left Marco's lungs in one slow exhale. He turned to the group. "We'll continue this later." The wall behind him split open into a hidden control hub. Monitors, live audio feeds, thermal tracking overlays, and encrypted network reports now streaming across the screens. Marco walked inside, alone. The door sealed behind him. Back at the airport, Agent Graves, who had slapped Ari, was pacing outside the holding room. Her radio buzzed. "Command is requesting a direct debrief." She scoffed. "What? Now? For what?" "They want to know the precise timeline of your contact with the minor," the voice replied flatly. "My contact? You mean the brat who forged a first-class ticket and pretended his dad owns—" The door to the holding area unlocked from the outside, but not by anyone near it. It slid open on its own. Graves spun around. "What the—" Inside, Ari hadn't moved. He simply looked at her, still calm. "You might want to answer that call," he said softly, nodding to the blinking light on her hip radio. Her fingers twitched as she reached for it. "This is Graves. Go ahead." What came next wasn't protocol. It wasn't even normal. A second voice, neutral and low, came through. "This is Compliance Director Singh. Live from Washington. You are to hand over your badge immediately and leave the terminal. Your credentials have been revoked." Graves froze. "What? You're joking, right? Over what?" "Excessive force. Violation of passenger conduct. Triggering ethical lockdown under Protocol Delta." "You can't do that." "We already did." Meanwhile, Ari sat perfectly still. But inside, his heart was pounding. Not from fear, from knowing exactly what would happen next. 3 floors above the terminal, The airport's internal ethics officer was already reviewing the surveillance footage. Graves's slap. Ari's reaction. The crowd. The timing. Then the overlay. Owner authority identified. A. Castillo connection to terminal security route verified. Manual override declined. The officer swallowed hard and picked up the red phone. Back at Castillo HQ, Marco Castillo was now watching the footage himself. He didn't blink. He didn't need to. He had trained Ari for this. Not to fight, to document, to expose, to make the system react instead of retaliating in anger. A secondary window opened on his screen. FAA HQ requesting live feed access. Authorize? Marco clicked. Yes. Back at the airport, passengers in Terminal B were still grounded. Some irritated, most just confused. Announcements had stopped. Flight info screens were frozen. But word was spreading. Some kid got slapped. He said his dad owns the airport. The system shut down after he made a call. You sure it wasn't a prank? No, bro. The whole terminal locked down. One man looked up from his phone, frowning. Wait, did he say Castillo? Inside the holding room, another figure appeared. Not security, not TSA. She wore a dark gray suit with a simple ID badge that read, Veritas Oversight Authority. Ari, she said, nodding with quiet respect. May I sit? He nodded. My name is Elise Grant. I oversee external compliance for Veritas Partners. Your activation just triggered the full ethics shutdown. I know, Ari said. That was the point. May I ask what happened? Ari calmly told her everything, from the gate, the accusation, to the slap. Word for word, no exaggeration, no anger. When he was done, she took a breath. She hit you, in public. Yes. And your only reaction was? Ari gestured toward the black phone. To press this. She looked at the device with a mix of fear and admiration. You do realize what that button actually does, right? Ari smiled faintly. Yeah, it reminds people that silence doesn't mean powerless. Outside, Graves was being escorted out, stiff, red-faced, shouting. You people are insane. That kid is no one. A uniformed FAA agent calmly stepped in front of her. That kid, he said quietly, has more operational authority than you'll ever hold. Back at Castillo HQ, Marco Castillo sat down slowly and opened a secure video line. It was time for the last step. 10 minutes later, the terminal lights returned. Screens rebooted, flights resumed. The lockdown lifted. Passengers were cleared, one by one. But not Graves. Not the supervisors who ignored complaints that morning. Not the 2 TSA agents who laughed when Ari mentioned his dad. They were already being placed under internal review, with a compliance team en route. Ari walked out of the holding room flanked by Veritas agents. Not as a suspect, but as a protected stakeholder. He didn't need applause. He didn't look for validation. But as he passed through the gate, he saw something that made him pause. A little girl, maybe 9 or 10, had been watching. Her mother whispered something in her ear. The girl looked at Ari and nodded. Just once. That was enough. Across the country, headlines were already surfacing on internal aviation boards. Flight crew assaults stakeholder's son. Veritas ethics protocol freezes terminal. New power in the skies. Who is Ari Castillo? Kid with a button. Why the industry is quietly rethinking everything. But Ari didn't care about articles. He wasn't here to be famous. He was here to test a system his father built and prove it could respond to cruelty with consequence. Next stop, Gate 19, Flight 1225, window seat. He boarded like everyone else. No special treatment. Except, when he sat down, a flight attendant approached. Nervous, sincere. Mr. Castillo, she said gently, would you like water or juice? Ari looked up. Just water, he said, then added, and a quiet flight, please. She nodded, eyes wide. You got it. The next morning, Houston woke up to something strange. Quiet panic. Not the kind you see on the news with sirens or protests, but in corner offices, inside legal teams, at investor roundtables. Because by 8:03 a.m., over 400,000 employees across 6 aviation networks had received a mandatory alert. Subject: Flight Ethics Activation, Castillo Protocol. A verified ethics escalation has triggered a sector-wide compliance audit. Any crew, contractor, or affiliate associated with Gate B, Houston International, 5:42 p.m. CST, will be under provisional ethics review. Disclosures are active. Legal counsel advised. Veritas Oversight Division. That email alone was enough to send 3 CEOs into emergency meetings, and one of them, Janice Lin, CEO of Skybridge Airlines, wasn't just panicked. She was furious. Inside Skybridge HQ, Janice slammed the printed report on the table. "You're telling me this entire thing got triggered by a kid?" Her general counsel nodded slowly. "Not just any kid. Ari Castillo. So, he's the son of Marco Castillo, who holds the controlling AI infrastructure behind our terminal ops and biometric boarding. And Ari has verified shareholder credentials through the Castillo Trust. That button he pushed? It activated the same kill switch we signed off on 5 years ago, for whistleblower protection." Janice narrowed her eyes. "So he slapped back with infrastructure?" Not slapped, silently froze. Meanwhile, across the country, news anchors were already circling the story like blood in the water. NBC Morning Report ran a quiet segment titled, "Slapped at the Gate. Boy says his father owns the airport." Then the terminal shuts down. And at first, it felt like just another viral story, until journalists got their hands on the compliance logs. Then, the Washington Post ran this: "A button, a slap, and $3.2 billion on pause. Inside the ethics freeze that's shaking U.S. aviation." By noon, the FAA had called a closed-door meeting. And Ari Castillo? He was quietly having lunch in his father's penthouse, legs curled up on the oversized couch, watching it all unfold on mute. "Do you want to say something publicly?" Marco asked. Ari shrugged. "Would it help?" Marco studied him. "You tell me." Ari reached for a strawberry, then paused. "If I speak, people might think it's about me, but it's not. It's about what she did because of what she assumed." Marco nodded. "You were calm. That's rare." "I was scared," Ari admitted. "But I didn't want to react the way she expected." Marco sat beside him, gaze distant. "I built systems," he said. "I never thought one day they'd need to protect my own son." "They didn't protect me," Ari said quietly. "I did." By 2:00 p.m., 11 p.m., Graves, the flight crew agent who slapped Ari, was now sitting in front of a disciplinary board. She didn't know half the people in the room, and that was the problem. They weren't from HR. They were from Veritas, FAA Ethics Division, and Department of Transportation Legal. One of them, a quiet man in a gray blazer, spoke first. "You've been recorded, reported, and confirmed for excessive conduct toward a minor with verified ownership status." She scoffed. "That kid lied." "He didn't," the woman beside him cut in. "And more importantly, it wouldn't matter if he had. You struck a minor. On camera, at a federal terminal. No further excuses. But you are hereby suspended from any federally affiliated airline operations, pending industry-wide review. Your badge is deactivated. Your union protections will be evaluated, but your access to classified terminal systems is already revoked." Graves finally looked shaken. "This isn't fair." The man stared her down. "You're right. It's not. It should have happened years ago. But it happened now because that kid didn't yell. He logged it." Later that evening, a letter was quietly distributed to top-level shareholders of all airport terminals under Castillo Infrastructure Group. Effective immediately, all operational contracts with GateOps, Aerotech Staff Corp and Skybridge affiliate service crews are under review. Compliance teams will begin randomized audits across 14 U.S. airports. Any incidents of abuse, bias, or excessive force will trigger temporary shutdowns per the Veritas Charter. Stakeholder-initiated reviews are now a standard clause. M. Castillo. At the bottom of the page was a red seal. Via Ari Castillo. Protocol, Sentinel Child. By morning, hashtags were trending. Slapped the wrong kid at airport justice. Ari pressed the button. Silence is power. Ari scrolled briefly, then put his phone down. He wasn't interested in fame, but his inbox was filling up with messages from other kids. I was pushed at LAX for asking where to sit. A flight staff mocked my grandma's accent. They told me my hijab made people uncomfortable. They asked if my dad could afford the seat. Ari just stared at the screen. One hand gripped the black phone again. That night, Marco came into his room. "You thinking of flying again?" "Yeah. Where to?" "Does it matter?" Marco chuckled. "No, I guess not." Ari looked up. "But this time, I want to sit in the back." Marco paused. "Why?" "I want to know if they treat me different when I don't look like someone who belongs in first class." Marco stared at his son, and for the first time since the slap, he smiled. "You're not just testing the system, are you?" Ari nodded. "I'm mapping it." Meanwhile, at the FAA, a quiet memo was signed into circulation. Effective Q3, all U.S. carriers must implement a Flight Ethics Early Warning System, FEWS, modeled in part after the Castillo Protocol. Discriminatory conduct flagged by passengers, regardless of age or status, must be reviewed within 24 hours. Repeat violators may be suspended from interstate operations. Deputy Administrator, FAA Ethics Board. One button. One slap. And now the entire aviation industry was rewriting how it listens. It had only been 48 hours, but for the senior board of Skybridge Airlines, it felt like the longest 2 days of their corporate lives. At precisely 9 o'clock a.m., the top 20 executives were seated in the executive conference suite on the 42nd floor of their Houston tower. The skyline stretched behind them, but no one was enjoying the view. They weren't here for strategy. They were here for containment. Janice Lin, their CEO, paced in front of the frosted glass wall. Her voice cut like cold metal. "We've received an ethics freeze across 14 terminals. The FAA has quietly issued an investigation request, and Castillo's legal team has just filed a clause activation that puts our entire biometric rollout on hold. That's $92 million suspended." Silence. Then someone near the window spoke. "He's just a kid." Janice turned. "No, he's a Castillo. You don't need age when you have control of the infrastructure." Down the hall, in a smaller room, two men sat across from each other. One, Marco Castillo, measured, clean-cut, wearing a subtle dark navy suit with no visible logos. No watch. No phone in sight. The other, Frank Dougherty, Skybridge's lead legal counsel. Frank exhaled. "We didn't know it was your son." Marco raised an eyebrow. "You don't need to know someone's father to not slap a child." Frank fidgeted. It was one crew member. Surely this doesn't justify full-scale audit. Marco didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. But it does justify activating Protocol Delta, which, if I remember correctly, was written by your firm at my request. Frank's mouth went dry. At that same moment, Ari sat at a cafe across town, eating quietly with his mother, Elena. She stirred her tea absent-mindedly. "You understand what your call triggered, don't you?" Ari nodded. "I didn't mean to mess everything up." "You didn't mess anything up," she said. "You made visible what's always been hidden." He looked up at her. "Am I bad for pushing it?" Elena reached across the table, gently touching his hand. "No, mijo, you're not bad. You just proved the system works when the right person dares to use it." Back in the boardroom, Janice Lynn continued her barrage. We have two choices. 1. Fight the audit, delay, PR spin. Or 2. Cooperate. Freeze everything, issue a public apology, accept the shareholder pain, and maybe live to tell about it. Her CFO, a balding man named Keenan, tapped his pen. What if Castillo pushes harder? He already is, Janice said, tossing a packet onto the table. Read the headline. It was a printout from that morning's Wall Street Journal. Air ethics is not optional anymore. Veritas Fund demands sector-wide compliance review. Underneath was a chilling subhead. $2.3 billion in airport infrastructure investments frozen until revised ethical certification is adopted. Keenan went pale. That's us. Janice didn't even blink. That's all of us. By late afternoon, 3 of the biggest terminal contractors had voluntarily suspended operations, citing compliance reevaluation. Airline union reps were calling emergency sessions. Investment funds were rearranging their portfolios. Travelers noticed gates closing, delayed flights, and shifting schedules. But what the public didn't see was the invisible shift. Every badge swipe, every body cam stream, every whisper in the corridor, now logged, now reviewed. Because once Protocol Delta is activated, the walls themselves start listening. Inside Ari's room that evening, he sat with his laptop open, FaceTiming his cousin, Mateo. You're on the news again, dude. I didn't want to be, Ari replied. Mateo grinned. Yeah, but you're like a ghost hacker hero now. People are saying you took down $1 billion airline by pressing a button. Ari sighed. I didn't take them down. I just showed what they really are. Mateo nodded. So what now? You going back to school Monday? Ari smirked. I am, and I'm walking straight into homeroom like nothing happened. You savage. That night, in a private teleconference, Marco joined a secure line with FAA Deputy Director Angela Cho and Veritas Fund Executive Henry Valdez. Angela spoke first. We've been trying for years to get real-time ethical accountability on airline staff. Your son may have just accelerated federal compliance by a decade. Henry added, Veritas wants to pilot an ethics credential named after Ari, the Castillo Standard. Voluntary for now, mandatory by next quarter for anyone receiving Veritas funding. Marco leaned back. He's just a boy. Angela smiled. And boys like him change systems. Meanwhile, Graves, the flight crew member who slapped Ari, was living a different timeline. She had hired a lawyer, filed for arbitration, claimed lack of clarity in badge hierarchy, but the footage was clear. So were the ethics codes, and worst of all, public opinion had turned. Even the unions weren't defending her. One quiet mistake, one loud consequence. By the end of the week, the Houston terminal where it all started had posted this sign. We are proud to be the first airport in the U.S. certified under the Castillo Standard for passenger ethics and dignity. Ari walked past that sign on Sunday with his parents. A security guard opened the VIP lane. Mr. Castillo? Ari looked at his dad. Marco nodded. But Ari didn't go through. He stayed in the regular line. People looked over, recognizing him. A man in line whispered to his wife, That's the kid from the story. Ari kept his head down, calm, until a TSA agent approached him quietly. You okay with crowds today, sir? Ari gave a small smile. Yeah, I've been through worse. In the distance, over the PA system, an announcement played. This terminal is now operating under Castillo Protocol guidelines. If you witness or experience any unethical behavior, please log it via the Ethical Incident Reporting Stations or use the Veritas app. Your voice matters. The crowd was quiet, not stunned, not angry, just alert. One boy, one slap, one system awakened. And karma? It arrived not with fists, but with audits, rewrites, and silence loud enough to echo across the gates. Hey, Ari, got a sec? Ari turned. Standing awkwardly by the lockers was Mr. Halverson, the assistant principal who rarely addressed students directly unless there was trouble. "Yeah?" Ari said cautiously. Halverson scratched the back of his neck. Dr. Grayson wants to see you in the main office." Ari blinked. "I didn't do anything." Halverson gave a half smile. "I know. This time you're not in trouble." That "this time" stung, but Ari let it slide. The walk to the office felt surreal. Kids stared, some whispered, others just moved aside, giving him space like he was some kind of authority. The front desk receptionist gave him a warm, unfamiliar smile. "You can go right in. Dr. Grayson's expecting you." Ari knocked once and entered. Dr. Grayson, the school principal, stood by the window. Her office was filled with sunlight and framed diplomas, but today it felt more like a boardroom than a school office. "Ari, come in. Close the door." He did. She motioned to the chair across from her desk, then sat down slowly herself. "I just got off a Zoom call," she began, "with someone from the Department of Education. They asked about you." Ari's stomach dropped. Dr. Grayson smiled, genuinely this time. "They're considering naming you to a National Student Advisory Panel on Ethics in Public Institutions." Ari blinked. "Wait, what?" "You don't have to decide now," she said quickly. "But they want students who understand systemic accountability. And, well, that seems to be your specialty." Ari sat still for a moment, then whispered, "I just wanted them to stop hurting people." "I know," she said softly. "That's why they called." Later that afternoon, Ari walked the edge of the soccer field during gym, headphones in, trying to stay invisible. But invisibility was hard when you'd accidentally broken the internet. "Yo, Ari!" someone shouted from midfield. "You shutting down recess next?" Laughter followed. A few mocking claps. Ari looked away. Then someone jogged over. Zoe, the tall, sharp-witted girl from his computer science elective. "You know they're not laughing at you, right?" she said. "They're not? They're scared of you." Ari looked confused. Zoe shrugged. "You exposed how fragile everything is. Nobody likes realizing they've been sleepwalking through systems that can be rewritten by a 13-year-old. I'm not trying to scare anyone." "Exactly," she said, tapping his arm. "That's why it's working." Back at Skybridge Airlines HQ, in a dim HR meeting room, 3 middle managers stared at a document on the screen. Employee 20904, Graves, Rebecca. Status: terminated violation of Ethical Interaction Protocol, Tier 1. Multiple confirmations. A 4th manager, new to the team, spoke hesitantly. "She wasn't even that bad. I mean, we've all heard worse on flights." That room went silent. Then one of the older managers said, "Yeah, and for the first time ever, that matters now." Across the country, in Phoenix, Arizona, a flight crew leader named Daniel Cho sat with his team in a training session. The presentation was called Passenger Dignity, Moving Beyond Compliance. Daniel leaned forward. "Does anyone know the name Ari Castillo?" Almost every hand went up. Daniel nodded. "Then you already know the why. Today's session is about the how." He clicked to the next slide. The Castillo Protocol is now being adopted by 19 airports. If your crew fails a dignity audit, your flight gets flagged. No appeals, no exemptions. A quiet chill passed over the room. One attendant whispered, "It's real now." Daniel met her eyes. "It's been real. We just didn't get caught." Meanwhile, in New York, a woman named Marla Jennings, CEO of a competing airline, sat in her penthouse suite overlooking LaGuardia. Her phone buzzed. "Incoming call. Veritas Fund. Ethics Oversight Division." She picked up. The voice on the other end was direct. "Ms. Jennings, this is a courtesy call. You have 48 hours to enroll your airline in the Castillo Compliance Tier 1 program. If not, your infrastructure credit lines will be reviewed." Marla paused. "I thought this wasn't mandatory yet." "Correct. It's not mandatory. But It's inevitable. Click. Back at home that evening, Ari sat by the kitchen island, drawing circuits in a notebook. His mom, Elena, stirred soup on the stove. "Did you hear from your dad?" she asked. "Yeah. He said some airport in Seoul asked if they could license the protocol." Elena raised her eyebrows. "International now?" Ari didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "Mom, does this make me dangerous?" She turned and looked at him for a long moment. "No, it makes you visible." In a law office downtown, Flight Attendant Graves sat across from her lawyer. "You'll be fine," he said, trying to sound confident. "We'll frame it as a misunderstanding. You didn't know he was someone important." "That's the point," Graves snapped. "He shouldn't have been someone important." The lawyer blinked. "That's not a great line." Friday morning, Ari stepped into the school library. The librarian, Mrs. Boyd, gave him a nod. "Hey, Ari. The mayor's assistant just called. They're naming a terminal lounge after your protocol." Ari blinked. "Wait, really? And your dad just emailed. He's flying back early. Wants to meet you at the terminal for something important." Ari's voice was cautious. "Important like I'm in trouble?" Mrs. Boyd smiled. "No, honey. Important like legacy." That night, Ari and Marco stood in a restricted area overlooking the new screening checkpoint. It looked no different from any other terminal, except for one small digital sign above the security line. "Ethics Zone Certified. Castillo Protocol Active." Marco gestured. "You see that?" Ari nodded. "You did that. Not me. Not my fund. You." Ari shifted on his feet. "But I didn't fix everything." "No," Marco said. "You didn't, but you made them look." The next Monday at school felt weird. Not chaotic, not angry, just quiet. Like the halls had absorbed what happened over the weekend, and now didn't know how to act around the kid at the center of it. Ari walked in with his hoodie up, earbuds in, not to be cool, just to breathe. He passed two teachers talking in whispers by the vending machines. One of them murmured, "That's him." He wasn't sure if they meant it like wow or oh no, probably both. In first period, the substitute teacher paused during roll call. "Castillo, Ari?" she asked. He raised his hand. She looked at him a little longer than necessary, then quickly moved on. By lunch, someone had printed out a copy of the New York Times op-ed, "The Kid Who Grounded a System." It had Ari's name, his school, a photo, blurry from behind. But it was him. Some students whispered it was fake. Others passed it around like a collectible. No one said it to his face, but everyone looked. At the far end of the cafeteria, Coach Redman, who'd once benched Ari from gym for not participating with proper attitude, walked past his table. Usually, he didn't even make eye contact. This time, the coach paused, cleared his throat. "You're doing all right, kid?" Ari looked up slowly. "Yeah, I'm good." Redman gave a single nod, then walked off. It wasn't much, but it was the closest thing to an apology that man had probably given anyone in 20 years. Back home, Elena sat on the couch, watching a rerun of some news clip she had recorded. It showed a Senate subcommittee hearing. A nervous-looking airline executive sat before a panel. "Yes, Senator, we're reviewing all internal training modules in light of the Castillo Protocol. You're saying this boy's system is now affecting federal aviation policy?" "Not directly, but the ripple effects are significant." Elena chuckled and hit pause. "Ari," she called out, "how does it feel knowing you made a ripple?" He walked in, hands in his hoodie pocket. "It wasn't just me. It was the way they treated people." She turned and looked at him fully. "No, mijo, it was you. They've been treating people like that for decades, but you were the one who flipped the power back." That night, Ari's dad called. From the tarmac, he could hear the engine noise in the background, but Marco's voice was calm. "Big day tomorrow," Marco said. Ari hesitated. "Are you sure I have to come?" "You don't have to," Marco replied. "But this time, they want to hear from you directly." "What if I mess it up?" "You won't." "What if I say the wrong thing?" Marco was quiet for a beat, then said, "Then say it with your chest and mean it." The next morning, they drove together to Skybridge International. Not through the front, but the operations entrance, where tarmac crew and security guards stood at attention. As they approached, Ari noticed something different. One of the guards, an older man who'd once barked at Ari for wandering into restricted space, gave him a small salute. Not sarcastic, real. They walked through a corridor marked Skybridge Leadership Briefing, Internal Crisis Response. Inside, the room was filled with executives, journalists, compliance officers, and even a few international observers. The CEO of Skybridge, Donna Marin, stood at the podium. She turned to Ari and motioned him forward. "This is the young man responsible for the fuse trigger. Please welcome him." Scattered applause filled the room. Ari stepped up. No script, just instinct. He looked around at the suits, the note-takers, the screens projecting charts and crisis metrics. Then he spoke. "I didn't mean to start a movement. I just wanted to be treated like I belonged." Silence. Then, "But when systems punish people for knowing their worth, that system isn't broken. It's doing what it was designed to do, and that design needs to change." This time, the applause was louder. Not just polite, respectful. As Ari walked back to his seat, someone reached out to shake his hand. It was Graves' replacement, the new head of crew ethics at Skybridge. She said softly, "You're not just a kid anymore." Ari looked her in the eye and said, "I never stopped being one. You all just stopped listening." After the briefing, Ari stood in a quiet hallway, looking out the glass wall that faced runway 8. His dad joined him, holding 2 paper cups of hot chocolate. "You know," Marco said, "they're thinking of naming the redesigned first-class gate after someone." Ari sipped. "Let me guess. You?" Marco smirked. "Nope, you." Ari paused. "Do I even want that?" "Doesn't matter if you want it. You earned it." That night, Ari sat alone in his room, looking through old photos on his tablet. There was one from years ago, him and Marco standing outside the terminal, Ari holding a toy plane. He zoomed in. Back then, he hadn't known what any of this meant. Airports, power, voice. But now, he did. And for the first time, he didn't feel small anymore. He didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. The following week at school felt like a mirror had flipped. Same building, same lockers, same lunch trays. But now, people walked past Ari and gave him a nod, a smile. Yo, that was crazy what you did." Ari wasn't used to being talked to so much, especially not by kids who once ignored him, or worse. At lunch, he usually sat near the corner of the room, alone by choice. But today, Deshaun and Malik, 2 seniors who used to clown him, walked over. "Yo," Malik said, hands in his hoodie. "You mind if we sit?" Ari raised an eyebrow. Deshaun chuckled awkwardly. "Man, we're just trying to be where history's made." Ari shrugged. "It's a free table." They sat, but they didn't joke. They asked questions, real ones. "Yo, how does it feel knowing your name's in that ethics report? Did you really write that code yourself? What do you think they'll change next?" Ari didn't have all the answers, but for once, he was the one being listened to. Later that day, Mrs. Talley, the school principal, called him into her office. He thought maybe he was in trouble. Again. But when he walked in, he saw her standing beside 2 men in suits and a woman with a press badge. "Ari," Mrs. Talley smiled carefully, "these folks are from the local news. They want to talk about your recent impact." He froze. "Do I have to?" "You don't," she said. "But it could be a good way to tell your side." He thought for a second, then nodded. "Okay, but I don't want them twisting it." Mrs. Talley smiled. then speak your truth. That night, the news segment aired. It wasn't sensational. It was quiet, almost reverent. Footage from Skybridge. Headlines like, "The Kid Who Quieted a Terminal." "When Justice Wears a Hoodie." They showed him walking with his dad across the tarmac. One clip caught him looking directly at the camera. Not posing, just present. The next day, Ms. Sutton, his computer science teacher, pulled him aside after class. "I owe you an apology," she said softly. "For what?" "For underestimating you. For assuming you were just another quiet kid with headphones." Ari looked at her. "Maybe I was, until they gave me a reason not to be." She nodded, eyes wet. "Well, you gave me a reason to rewrite my syllabus. I'm adding a section next term on ethics in design, based on FEWs." He blinked. "You're teaching my protocol?" She smiled. "If you'll let me." Back home, Elena had made arroz con pollo, comfort food, celebration food. But Ari didn't feel like celebrating. He sat at the table, picking at his plate. His mom noticed. "What's wrong, mi amor?" "I don't know. Everyone's being nice now." "And that's bad?" "It just feels fake, like they hated me yesterday, and now they want to be best friends." Elena set down her fork. "They didn't hate you. They just didn't see you." "Same thing. No, baby. Now they're seeing you through the lens of your power. That's different, and it's okay to be careful with that." Ari looked at her. "Feels like they're only treating me better because of what I can do, not who I am." Elena reached across the table, held his hand. "Then show them who you are, every day. Let your character do the heavy lifting. The rest will sort itself out." That weekend, he got an invitation, not to a school dance, not to a coding camp, but to Washington, D.C. The email came from the Office of Technology and Civil Rights. They were hosting a youth roundtable, not flashy, not press-driven, just a gathering of kids like him. Kids who'd built things, broken systems, or called out injustice through design. Ari stared at the screen. He'd never even been on a school field trip out of state. Now they wanted him in policy rooms? His dad peeked over his shoulder. "That's the good kind of trouble," Marco said. "Say yes." At school the next Monday, Graves's niece Tamara approached him. They'd never spoken. She'd always been distant, cool. Now she looked nervous. "I know you probably hate me," she blurted. Ari blinked. "I don't. I didn't know what my uncle said, what he did, until after. I'm sorry." He nodded slowly. Tamara looked like she might cry. "But you didn't have to go that far, right? I mean, shutting down an entire terminal?" Ari exhaled through his nose. "I didn't shut it down. The system did. I just told the truth." She stared, then whispered, "That's what scares them." By Friday, another shift had happened. Ari wasn't a curiosity anymore. He was becoming a presence. Kids asked him to review their app prototypes. Teachers asked him to guest speak. A mural was painted in the cafeteria with the words, "Know your voice, code your values." Beneath it, a silhouette in a hoodie, not his name, but everyone knew. That night, Ari lay in bed, eyes open. He wasn't mad or excited, just still, because for the first time in his life, people had stopped talking over him and started asking, "What do you think?" A white van pulled up outside Ari's apartment. It wasn't marked, but it wasn't subtle either. Inside, two men in suits stepped out. One carried a briefcase, the other wore a DHS badge, Hook. The hallway outside his door filled with the sound of leather shoes on linoleum. And just like that, the world Ari thought he could manage quietly got very loud. Tung Tak Mong. If you've ever had one moment change the entire way people see you, tell us where you're watching from. Marco opened the door. "Can I help you?" "Yes, sir. We're here to speak with your son." Ari peeked around the corner. "I didn't do anything." The taller agent smiled. That's exactly why we're here. At the table, the men laid out documents. Governmental, stamped, classified. They didn't threaten. They didn't flatter. They offered a chance. You built something that bypassed half of our existing accountability systems, one agent said. You didn't hack, the other added. You built guardrails, ethical ones. That's rare. Ari shifted in his seat. What do you want from me? We want to partner, the agent said plainly. Integrate Fuse into a federal oversight model. His dad folded his arms. You mean you want to buy it? No, the man corrected. We want to license it, with you as the chief architect. Ari sat with it. The word architect bounced around his brain like a pinball. He was 14. He still wore Velcro sneakers. Now the Department of Homeland Security was asking him to influence national systems. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He asked for time. Later, on the roof of their apartment building, Ari sat with Elena. She lit a candle in a glass jar, something she always did when she needed to think. You okay, mi niño? I don't know. What's pulling at you? They want to scale it. Fuse. Use it everywhere. And that's bad? No, I made it so no one else could silence someone like me. But what happens if they use it to silence other people? Elena placed a hand on his knee. Then you don't give them control. You keep it. You lead. The next day, he met with his godfather, Tito Alvarez, a systems engineer at a telecom company. Quiet genius. Big laugh. Always wore mismatched socks. Tito leaned back in his chair, staring at Ari's code on the screen. You ever heard of the Heisenberg principle? Breaking Bad? No, nerd, Tito chuckled. It means when you observe a thing, you change it, even unintentionally. So if they put Fuse into the world with your name on it, it'll change. Because of pressure. Politics. People will expect it to stay neutral. It won't. Ari looked at him. So, I shouldn't do it? Tito smiled. I didn't say that. I said build the rules around it before they do. You made the code. Now make the contract. That night, Ari couldn't sleep. So he pulled out his laptop and started drafting. Not a product, a charter. 3 days later, he emailed the agents. Subject, conditional agreement to license FWs. He attached a 6-page document titled The Fair Ethics Enforcement and Warning System Charter, Draft V01. It included non-exclusivity clause, public transparency requirements, independent civilian oversight board, permanent authorship attribution, anti-misuse, kill switch provision. Within 30 minutes, he got a reply. Consider us impressed. We'll need a legal review, but you just wrote the most balanced ethics contract we've seen in 10 years. By Friday, the White House communications team called. They wanted Ari in D.C. This time, not for a roundtable, for a signing ceremony. Do I have to give a speech? No, they said, but we hope you say something. At the airport, the same one where everything had started, Ari walked through the terminal. No one stopped him this time. No one asked for his ticket. No one looked sideways at his hoodie. In fact, someone whispered, "That's the kid," and smiled. As he boarded the flight, a man in a pilot uniform greeted him at the door. Not the one from the incident, but he held Ari's gaze for a second longer than usual. Then said, "Welcome aboard, Mr. Moreno." It was the first time anyone had called him that outside a roll call. He sat near the window, this time in business class. Not because he paid for it, because someone made space. And as the plane ascended over the city he once felt invisible in, Ari looked out and whispered, "I built this so no one else has to prove they belong." The room was not what Ari expected. No velvet ropes, no marble podiums. Just a long rectangular table surrounded by agency officials, airline executives, education reps, and a few quiet faces from civil rights groups. In the middle of the table, the charter. Printed, bound, and stacked neatly, ready for signatures. Ari sat at the far end, next to a woman from the Office of Civil Aviation. To his right was a man from the Federal Ethics Bureau. In front of him, a small white nameplate. Ari Moreno, creator, Fuse System. The president didn't attend, but a cabinet-level deputy did, along with heads of 3 major airline alliances. One of them cleared his throat. "I'll be honest," the CEO said. "I didn't expect we'd be following a protocol created by a teenager." Murmurs flickered around the room. Ari didn't flinch. He leaned forward and said clearly, "That's the point. Maybe the adults let this stuff rot too long." Silence. Then, a quiet chuckle from the civil rights chairwoman. "Well, I believe we're in the right room then." Each representative signed. One by one. With every pen stroke, Ari felt a pressure lift from his chest. He wasn't just the kid who made noise at the airport anymore. He was the reason a federal mandate now required every airline receiving federal aid to implement transparent ethics monitoring across passenger service, staff behavior, and racial equity. After the signing, a public statement was read. Ari didn't speak at the podium, but his name was said 5 times by officials. They used words like pivotal, independent architect, transformative. He didn't hear applause, he heard accountability, and that was louder. Back in Chicago, news broke quickly. Moreno Protocol becomes standard in 117 airports by Q4. Youth voice changes federal aviation oversight. But the real impact? Graves. It started as a ripple. 2 days after the signing, internal audits launched across all participating airlines. Each audit pulled up incident logs, staff complaint records, and, in some cases, video footage previously ignored or buried. One clip, taken from the Skybridge terminal, resurfaced. It showed Graves shoving Ari, calling him a liar, mocking his father. But now, the footage wasn't just unfortunate. It was evidence. And under the Fuse Charter, it triggered automatic review. That Friday, the Department of Transportation issued a public disciplinary report. Senior Terminal Officer Charles Graves is hereby relieved of duty pending investigation into ethics violations and use of authority misconduct under the FEW's compliance clause. The headline hit harder than any viral video. Boy, they tried to just silence their system. The morning after the report, Ari walked through Skybridge Airport again. This time, not in a hoodie. He wore a black polo with a small stitched emblem. Fuse Initiative. It didn't scream power, but the way people moved around him, stepping aside, nodding, whispering, it was clear. The airport knew who he was now, and who his family always had been. A new sign had been installed near security. It read, "This facility monitors passenger and staff ethics behavior in partnership with the FEW's protocol." Ari paused. His face reflected in the metal beneath the lettering. Elena touched his shoulder. "You built a mirror, mi amor," she whispered. "Now they have to look in it." Later that day, Marco received a formal apology letter from the Skybridge Board of Directors. They didn't just say, "We're sorry." They included a public declaration that Marco Moreno had never once attempted to misuse his ownership stake, that every claim made against his son had been without basis. And they offered Marco a new role, head of ethics oversight for the city's transportation board. Marco declined, but suggested someone else. 3 weeks later, Graves's former position was filled, not by another security official, not by a corporate suit, but by Janelle Carter, a black woman, former school administrator who had quietly submitted a proposal during the Fuse testing phase. Her mission, community trust restoration. Her first order, an all-staff seminar titled "The Difference Between Authority and Integrity." Ari was invited as a guest speaker. On stage that day, in front of 600 airport staff, Ari didn't rehearse. He wore the same hoodie from the day of the slap. He looked straight into the crowd and said, "I'm not here to embarrass anyone, but I'm also not here to make you comfortable. You work in a system that tells certain people, you don't belong here. But that's not your job. Your job is to protect everyone's journey, not just the ones that look like yours." No one clapped, but no one looked away. And when he stepped down, 4 employees walked up, shook his hand, and said, "You changed how I see this place." That night, Marco hugged Ari longer than usual, not because he was proud, but because finally, the system had listened to his son. And not for 5 minutes on a YouTube clip, but in ink, in law, in structure. The invitation arrived in an unmarked envelope. There was no logo, no header, just a crisp white card. Federal Task Force, Ethics Integration and Artificial Infrastructure. Invitation for Ari Moreno. Confidential. RSVP required. Ari stared at it for a long time. He didn't show his mom at first. Not because he wanted to hide it. He just wasn't sure what to feel. He'd spent months building Fuse to fix one problem: how people get treated in public spaces. He didn't build it to become this, a national ethics consultant? At 16? What did they even want him to do? Monitor the entire country? Marco noticed the letter on the table. He didn't ask much, just raised an eyebrow and said, "You're not surprised anymore, huh?" Ari shrugged. "Honestly, I'm a little scared." A week later, Ari flew to Washington, D.C. Not in first class. Not in coach, either. They sent a private charter. At the Capitol Annex, he met a room full of people who didn't smile much. Lawyers, defense contractors, AI ethicists, 2 people from the FAA, and a woman from DARPA who barely blinked. The meeting lasted 6 hours. They showed Ari 3 prototypes of systems being used in security gates, facial recognition terminals, and smart gate boarding lanes. They called them frictionless, but Ari asked one question that froze the room. What happens when it flags the wrong person? No one answered. He leaned back, arms crossed. You don't need faster profiling, you need better remembering. Afterward, the deputy secretary pulled him aside. He tried to play friendly. "You've done something impressive, son. Fuse is already being modeled in Tokyo and Frankfurt. But we're talking national scale now, the ethics layer of everything." Ari looked out the tall window. Below, he could see the National Mall stretching into the horizon. "Is this about justice?" Ari asked. "It's about control," the man replied, too quickly. That was enough. That night, Ari sat in his hotel room, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the first day, the slap, the humiliation, the silence, the system he had been forced to build when no adult listened. Now, they all listened, but for the wrong reasons. He opened his laptop and began typing. A new clause, a new protocol, a built-in failsafe. 2 weeks later, he called a press conference. He stood at the same podium where federal officials had praised him a month before, but this time, his tone was different. Fuse was built to observe, not to punish. It was built so people could see who they are, not be punished for what they look like. Reporters leaned in. Starting next quarter, all institutions implementing FWs must include community oversight panels and require consent-based auditing. If you don't build trust, you're just rebuilding surveillance with a prettier face. He didn't wait for applause. He left. That same day, 3 agencies withdrew plans to weaponize FWs into predictive enforcement tools. Ari had drawn a line. At home, Elena smiled quietly at the headlines, but Marco looked deeper. That night at dinner, he asked Ari directly, "Do you think you made it better?" Ari nodded slowly. "Yeah, but I also realized something." Marco raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Justice isn't about who holds the power. It's about who refuses to misuse it." 6 months later, Ari was offered a seat at the National Advisory Board on Ethics and Infrastructure. He accepted, with conditions. He asked for a youth council with representation from communities most impacted by discrimination. He asked for data deletion rights for flagged individuals. He asked for an ethics charter in plain English, readable by any 10th grader. They agreed. And just like that, a boy once slapped for telling the truth had reshaped the language of power. He didn't post about it. He didn't celebrate. He just kept building. Because somewhere, Another kid was probably being told they don't belong here. And Ari had already written the blueprint to answer them. It started with a headline: "Single mom flagged by Fuse, denied boarding in Miami." A blurry cell phone video attached. A woman in a gray hoodie stood at a boarding gate, clutching her toddler in one arm and waving her ticket with the other. A gate agent pointed toward a monitor. "The system tagged you. Secondary review. Step aside." The mom looked panicked. "I don't understand. I've flown this route 3 times this year." "Ma'am, the system doesn't lie." But it had. Ari watched the clip on mute. He was in New York, preparing for a roundtable with transportation executives. Elena had texted him the video 5 minutes before it went viral. "This isn't what you built it for." His stomach churned. Within 24 hours, the story made national news. The woman's name was Chantel Rivers, 34, an ICU nurse from Atlanta. The violation? A flag in the database suggesting aggressive posture during a prior travel dispute, though no formal complaint had ever been filed. Just a false pattern. The algorithm had learned it from thousands of incidents that looked similar, mostly involving Black women expressing frustration in stressful settings. It wasn't a bug. It was a mirror, and it was cracked. Ari skipped the panel. He flew to Atlanta. He didn't tell the press. He didn't ask for a driver. He just showed up at Grady Memorial, waited by the staff exit, and asked to speak with Chantel. She walked out in scrubs, her face a mix of caution and exhaustion. "You're the boy, huh?" she said. Ari nodded. "I'm sorry." She didn't flinch. "Are you sorry for what happened? Or sorry it happened to me?" That one stung. They sat on a bench outside the hospital. He let her speak. She told him about her daughter missing her first school recital, about the humiliation of being escorted away in front of dozens of strangers, about how it reminded her of her mother's generation, back when systems weren't coded, just painted in white. Then she looked at him squarely. "You built something powerful, but don't let them use your name to build prisons." That night, Ari didn't sleep. He reviewed every Fuse protocol, every line of code, every auto-flagging rule, every machine learning parameter. He realized something chilling. The system had grown smarter, but not wiser. It was doing exactly what the airlines wanted, reducing conflict by preemptively flagging risky passengers. Only now, it was cloaked in legitimacy. His name. At dawn, Ari wrote a memo. Not a PR release, not a speech. A stand-down directive. Effective immediately, all automated flagging features in VWs must be disabled until a full Human Review and Ethics Council audit is completed. No individual shall be denied service, access, or dignity based on predictive behavior modeling alone. No exceptions. He sent it to every agency, partner airline, and implementation firm. Then he published it publicly. The backlash was instant. 3 airlines called it reckless. 1 threatened to pull out of the Fuse network. A DC official warned him, "You're giving people ammunition to discredit everything you've done." But Ari had already answered that. On camera, standing outside Grady Memorial with Chantel by his side. If protecting human dignity ruins your bottom line, then maybe your line's already bankrupt. The wave broke wider. Dozens of flagged passengers came forward. Some were Black, some Latino, some elderly. One was a military veteran with PTSD. All had been shaped by the same blind algorithm. VW's 3.0 was drafted within a month. It included consent-based activation, independent ombudsman review panels, bias detection audits with open transparency, a fail-safe clause called the Rivers Amendment, named after Chantel. And this time, Ari didn't write it alone. He formed a team. Technologists, civil rights lawyers, passenger advocates, former flight attendants, Chantel. She didn't code, but she rewrote the language of the documentation in plain English. If people don't understand the system judging them, it's not justice. It's a trap. 6 weeks later, the new version launched with a press conference. Ari didn't take the podium. Chantel did. She stood tall in a tailored blazer, with her daughter in a red dress by her side. "I'm not an engineer, but I know what fairness feels like. And now, thanks to real people doing real listening, I can finally say, this system works for us, not just on us." Ari stood in the back, watching. His hands shook, not with fear, with clarity. Back at home that night, Marco sat beside him. They didn't talk much, just watched the news in silence. Finally, Marco spoke. "You know what this is, right?" "What?" "You created something powerful. Then you had the guts to check it. That's what leadership looks like." Ari exhaled deeply. "It's not about being the smartest in the room." Marco smiled. "It's about being the first to admit the room might be wrong." 3 months after the Rivers Amendment rolled out, Ari received an offer. Not a casual pitch, a full buyout. From Oros Systems, the global infrastructure AI giant. They didn't send an email. They flew a jet. Ari met them at a private suite in Chicago. 3 men in suits, 1 woman in a silk blazer, sharp eyes behind clear lenses. "We're prepared to offer $180 million up front for Fuse and its full architecture. You'd retain creative credit, of course." Ari blinked. "And control?" The woman didn't flinch. "Implementation discretion would shift to our urban compliance division." He didn't need to Google them. He knew what Oros did. They built smart systems for everyone, but only really served the powerful. Predictive housing risk, predictive truancy detection, predictive crime corridors. Now they wanted predictive boarding behavior? Ari said nothing. The woman leaned in. "Ari, this is a chance to scale globally. You won't stop bias with micro panels and school board ethics. Let us take it further." He looked at her, steady. "Further than what? Justice or control?" That night, he sat alone at Millennium Park. The city buzzed around him. Tourists, lights, trains, rush. He opened his phone. 3 unread texts from Marco. 1 from Elena. 1 from Chantel. Just a single line. "Whatever you choose, don't forget what you fought for." He closed his eyes. The memories came back sharp. The slap, the silence, the call, the voices in the hearing room, the mothers, the veterans, the kids, the echo of the gate agent's words. The system doesn't lie. But it had, and it still could, if the wrong hands got to write the truth. The next morning, Ari walked into the Oros suite in a plain black hoodie. He didn't sit. He placed a folder on the table. "This is the counteroffer." They looked confused. "We're not negotiating," the lawyer said flatly. "I'm not either," Ari replied. Inside the folder was a single sheet. "Fuse is now open source." The woman blinked hard. "You're giving it away?" "No, I'm giving it back." He leaned forward. "To communities, to activists, to watchdogs, to schools, to elders, to passengers, to anyone who's ever been told they didn't belong, this system now belongs to them." The room went silent. Ari stood. Power doesn't live in ownership. It lives in who you protect when no one's watching. And he walked out. By the end of the week, Fuse 4.0 launched globally under a Creative Commons license. Its governance board was made up of 17 people, none of whom were from Silicon Valley. It had 0 monetization incentives, no ad integration, no data sales, just ethics, transparency, consent. The ripple was immediate. European airports adopted it within 48 hours. Brazil integrated it into their municipal transit system. Indigenous councils in Australia modified it for cultural safety screening. Ari watched all this from his childhood bedroom. No press tour, no signature hoodie line, just his laptop. And quiet. That Sunday, Marco grilled in the backyard. The air smelled like smoke, charcoal, and rosemary. Ari sat with his laptop open, watching real-time commit logs from developers across the world modifying Fuse. "You're not gonna license that?" Marco joked. "Nope." "You're not worried they'll mess it up?" Ari smiled. That's the point. Now they get to decide what fairness looks like in their world. Elena joined them later, laughing at a meme someone had sent about kid who canceled the TSA. Ari chuckled too, but the weight behind his eyes lingered. That night, as the stars came out, Ari went back to the bench behind the school where everything started. The spot where he first sat alone after the slap. The spot where he first thought, what if we could just measure how people treat each other? He sat there now, older, not much taller, but infinitely louder. Not in volume, but in impact. He whispered to the dark sky, they don't get to write the story. We do. And for once, he felt peace. What would you do if the system gave you the power to decide who belongs? Would you give it away like Ari did? Or keep control to make sure justice is never misused again? Tell us where you're watching from and what justice means to you.